Hello? Oh, hey, that works. Good. Thank you for coming to my talk. I know this is a tough time slot. If I were you, I'd be watching Don Scalzi right now. So, thank you. Right? Yeah, there's always so many things to choose from on the boat, so thanks for coming. So my name is Beth Gordon, and I have a dog. His name is Kuiper. But you can pronounce it Cooper or Kuiper. He doesn't care. He's a dog. So I spent the summer taking him to museums and taking pictures of him with space artifacts. So this is going to be kind of the history of the American space program through pictures of my dog. I had to cut a bunch of content to make this fit into an hour. So I have roughly from America's first satellite to Apollo 11. So maybe we can do Apollo 11 onwards in our next cruise next year. Yay. I am not an expert. I'm just really proficient at using Google and have put a lot of time into this, so I'm probably wrong about something. Come tell me afterwards. But you're free to ask questions, free to video, take pictures during. Let's see. So before we get started, I want to just do a disclaimer, don't just show up with your dog in a museum. You will get in trouble. You will get me in trouble for giving you the idea. It will not be good. So this is a picture of Echo. She's a service dog. You can tell because she's on the boat. This is my dog. He's not a service dog. You can tell because he's not on the boat. This is a picture I took of him at U.S. Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So this dog is medical equipment. It can always go with their person to museums. My dog is basically Zoolander, so he can only do photo shoots with permission, with written explicit approval in advance. This one is trained to do specific tasks. Mine is trained to pose for specific pictures. So yeah, just my dog's not a service dog. I don't want anyone to think my dog is a service dog. You see sometimes people on Instagram put a service dog vest on their dog and take it to Disneyland. We are not doing that. Probably 90% of the time we were going either before hours or after hours, just so we wouldn't distract anyone. And in the tiny, one or two times that we were going during the museum was open, I was he's not a service dog, running around telling everybody. He's just on Instagram. So, just wanted to get out of the way. So, my dog has been to 26 states over the course of 2 road trips, 2 summers. The first was a sabbatical that my former employer gave a sabbatical every 7 years. And then this past year I quit my job in May and just started traveling with him, which was really fun. So these are some of the museums he's been to. He's been to 26 states. He's been to see Apollo 8, Apollo 16. Apollo 11 was here, but it's going to be here real soon. This is Apollo 9. There's a Gemini somewhere there. We'll go through that. Let's see. So unfortunately, if we're talking about the history of the space program, we have to start with Nazis. We'll get through the Nazi part really quick, and then we can not talk about Nazis. This is a picture of a V-2 rocket engine at the Stafford Air and Space Museum in Weatherford, Oklahoma. This is a real V-2 engine, which means that it was part of the 400 tons of rocket parts that were captured by the Allies. Most of those rocket parts went to the United States. A few of them were tested by the British in what was actually known as Project Backfire. But these were built at a concentration camp effectively by slaves. It was not a happy story. About 10 times as many people died building the rockets as died in the bombings on London, so just not a happy story overall. But the reason we're talking about this is because these rockets that we captured from the Nazis basically directly impacted our development of our first United States rocket. So this basically turned into Redstone. And as part of that, so March 1945 was between Germany's surrender and Japan's surrender in World War II. So we wanted to find out how far the Nazis had gotten with developing their own atomic bomb, because that was pretty important information to have. So we basically spent a bunch of scientists in after the Army, because we couldn't just be hey Army, can you look for information related to this top secret project that nobody's supposed to know about? We had to have separate people to go look at that stuff up. So the Allies were crossing the Rhine. They captured a university called Bonn University. There was a Polish lab technician that approached one of the Allied soldiers and said, hey, I found this toilet that appears to have something important in it, and it turned out to be a half-flushed list of Nazi scientists that someone had tried to flush down the toilet and not succeeded. That list was compiled by a senior Gestapo official, so they managed to find his office and find the rest of the list. On that list was Werner von Braun, as well as a bunch of other Nazi scientists. So around the end of World War II, we basically realized that they hadn't made much progress in the atomic bomb, but they made a lot of other scientific discoveries, and it was basically take those discoveries to the United States or let the USSR have them. So we ended up importing a bunch of German scientists to the United States. It was a secret project, but didn't stay secret for long. By November 1945, the New York Times had already done an expose about it, and Eleanor Roosevelt and Albert Einstein were like, what the can we not do this? So there was public opposition. It was called Operation Paperclip. The paperclip referred to the paperclip that they put on the immigration files of the more problematic German scientists. So that was a thing. Werner von Braun was a complicated dude. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking to him, but the things that you should know, he was one of the scientists that was brought over in Operation Paperclip. He was the technical director of the V2 rocket project, and also the technical director of the Saturn V, which is the rocket that would take us to the moon. He was also kind of like the chief brand advocate for space travel in the United States. He did a collaboration with Disney. Like, there's a Disney cartoon about space travel starring Werner von Braun, which is kind of interesting. He was the technical director of the U.S. Army Missile Facility, who developed Redstone, which is going to be the rocket that will launch our first satellite and our first American into space. He was also the director of NASA Marshall in Hinsdale, and basically what's the U.S. Space and Rocket Center today, which is where I took this picture. These are pictures of Werner von Braun's office at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center that I took. And he came up with the idea of Space Camp. That was Werner von Braun's idea, which is kind of interesting. So this is a PGM-11 Redstone missile with Kuiper for scale at the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This Redstone was developed by the U.S. Army effectively from the V2 rocket. This is effectively, so here's our Jupiter C, which is going to turn into Juno 1. This is effectively the rocket that launched our first satellite. This is effectively the rocket that's going to launch our first couple of Americans into space. This is the missile that Kuiper is staying next to. So they're effectively the same size, so you can kind of get an idea there. And this is a one-stage missile. The first successful test of this missile was on January 27th, 1954. And then, anyway, there's a bit of dates in here. They're effectively the same. So this is an American space history program, but we kind of have to set the scene with our Russian, like what they're doing. So this is a single exposure photo we took in Eastern Oregon, like the day before the total eclipse a couple years ago. Just kind of looking into space. So in July 1955, Eisenhower committed to launching the first U.S. satellite as part of a program called the International Geophysical Year, which was not actually a year, it was actually like 18 months, which is confusing. But we basically committed in 1955 to launch a satellite within the next 18 months. We weren't in a big hurry to do it. We didn't think it was a big deal to be first. And there was actually some incentive to not be first because there is no legal precedent for putting a satellite into space. So if you're in someone's airspace over their country, it's pretty clearly their airspace. But if you're above that, like, is that their airspace? Or is it shared space? Like, we didn't have a legal precedent for that. And if you launch a satellite that can take pictures, like, you might piss off some countries. So we actually had some incentive to not be first. We knew that the Russians were preparing to launch a satellite. Like, we had U-2 planes that were taking pictures, so Eisenhower knew about it. He didn't think it'd be a big deal. He was like, whatever, a satellite. And then suddenly the Russians launched Sputnik 1, and everyone was like, there's a thing! It's in space! Is it looking at us? We don't know! So, the other thing is that if you can put something into space, like, you can deliver a missile to someone's country, potentially, so that's scary. So everyone's kind of freaking out. Sputnik's in space. 3 weeks later, the Russians murdered a dog, which we won't really talk about. It's not a happy story. But not all of the dogs were murdered. Some of the Sputnik dogs survived. Belka and Strelka survived in Sputnik 5. One of Strelka's puppies actually went to JFK, and I think her descendants are still alive today. I have a funny quote about that. According to Caroline Kennedy, Mom was sitting next to Khrushchev at a state dinner in Vienna. She ran out of things to talk about, so she asked about the dog, Strelka, that the Russians had shot into space. During the conversation, my mother asked about Strelka's puppies. A few months later, a puppy arrived, and my father had no idea where the dog came from and couldn't believe my mother had done that. So that is the story of the space dog that ended up at the White House. Let's see. What are we doing on time? Oh, good. All right. Project Vanguard. So, due to the sort of aforementioned legal issues with launching a satellite into space, we thought it was really important to launch our first satellite on a civilian rocket and not on a military rocket. And since Redstone was effectively a military project, that was kind of out if we wanted to not use a military project. So the U.S. Navy built this separate rocket called the Vanguard rocket. It was kind of meant to be a civilian project. Our first satellite attempt launch at it, and remember this is after Sputnik. Sputnik was first. It was a spectacular failure. It exploded on the pad. This is on live national television. It was not great. So we went back to the drawing board. This is Kuiper with a giant pencil in Washington State. Or Plan B. So this is Kuiper with the actual launch console for Explorer 1, which ended up being our first satellite. This is at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. So Werner von Braun was on this Redstone project, and he really wanted to put something into space, but they were like, no, we can't use a military project for space. But he kind of kept doing this testing that was ostensibly for military testing, but it was really sort of like space testing. So he kind of like lied about the intention of the test and managed to get sort of things prepared anyway. So when Vanguard failed, he was kind of like, hey. So they were able to get things ready to go like pretty quickly, and they were able to get Explorer 1 up on January 31st. And then Explorer 1 led to the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belts, which ended up being pretty important for the rest of our planning. Let's see. Yeah, if they had chosen to use Redstone instead of building this whole other rocket, they could have launched as early as 1956. So we could have been first if we had chosen to. We just kind of just didn't think it was a big deal. This is a full-scale model of the Vanguard satellite made out of cake and pretzels. And yes, he did get to eat it. So we did eventually get our civilian Vanguard rocket working. We only used it for a couple of launches. The only real notable thing is that it was the first 3-stage rocket launch. Because the Russians actually used 2-stage rockets for their satellite launches, and then our Redstone was a 1-stage, so that was kind of notable. This Vanguard 1 satellite was also the first satellite with solar panels, and it's still in orbit. You can track it online on the satellite trackers, which is kind of neat. So it is the oldest man-made object in space, and this is an actual size model, like full-scale model. It's really like small. I think the Russians called it the grapefruit satellite. It does not still work. I think it only worked for like a couple of years. I'd have to look at like how long it exactly works, but it's just kind of this ball just orbiting, doing its thing. Alright, so we put some stuff into space, we put some dogs into space. Let's work on putting people into space, because that seems like the next logical step. So this is an unflown Mercury test capsule at the St. Louis Science Center. So we talked about the Mercury program. The code names are really confusing, so I'm going to try and help break it down. They all have a 7 at the end. That's because there were 7 Mercury astronauts, and they wanted to honor all the 7 Mercury astronauts on each mission. You'll see that the missions are named Mercury Redstone and Mercury Atlas, and that refers to the rocket that was used for their launch. All of the Mercury Redstone launches are suborbital, so they went up and they went down. All the Mercury Atlas launches were orbital, which means they actually went all the way around the Earth. Mercury Redstone 1 was an unmanned test flight with our Redstone rocket. It reached 4 inches of height, which was actually a problem because it came back down and you still have this fully loaded rocket sitting on the rocket pad full of rocket fuel ready to explode and kill people. So people in the bunker house were kind of like freaking out, like, what do we do with this rocket? Like, it could kill us. Do we shoot it with a rifle? Like, what do we do? They eventually decided to just wait until morning until like the liquid oxygen had just boiled off and then it was safe again, but it was kind of a harrowing night for them, like just kind of hoping they could just wait. So that was pretty dangerous. So the goal of Project Mercury was basically, can we get a guy into orbit and return him safely? And then we'll talk about Project Gemini, which is, can we put 2 guys into orbit and have them do some stuff and then return safely? And then Project Apollo is, can we get these guys to the moon and get them back safely? Mercury Redstone 2 was a chimpanzee flight, which is why we have Kuiper with a banana for scale. So obviously we've used animals as test spaceflight for a long time, but that's not the first use of animals in aviation. The first recorded case I could find was the first crewed, I won't say manned, I guess, hot air balloon flight. That was a rooster, a duck, and a sheep. And they survived. They were totally fine. They were probably really confused. But they were fine. Ham the chimp survived his flight. He lived for another 22 years after Mercury Redstone 2. According to NASA, he appeared to be in good condition and readily accepted an apple and half an orange. Alright, so let's put the first dude in space. It'll clearly be an American, right? No. You're in for a surprise. Oh, thank you. Excellent. That was Brian. He came up with that yesterday. Thank you, Brian. This is a picture of Kuiper. This is actually a Soyuz capsule, which is kind of their answer to the Apollo program. It's not Vostok capsule, but this was taken to the Chabot Space and Science Center. So yes, the first person in space was a Russian named Yuri Gagarin. We were only planning on doing a suborbital flight, but Yuri actually went and orbited on the Earth on his first try. So that happened. We were not winning the space race at the start. Oh, and the reason that this is round is because in the Russian capsules, they didn't really have the ability to reorient it or sort of like turn it so that the heat shield would be down. Like that wasn't a strength of the Russian capsules. So you'll see like the American capsules kind of look like a bell and they have the heat shield on the bottom. So because this wasn't as maneuverable, basically the whole thing was a heat shield. So we finally got our first guy into space. So you may not recognize this reference, but in the Mass Effect video games, your main character is named after Commander Shepard, and you can get a hoodie for your character that looks like this. So I made him a hoodie. So Commander Alan Shepard was our first American into space. He named his capsule Freedom 7. So this is our first manned flight of Project Mercury, is Mercury Redstone 3. Interesting fact about this flight, he forgot to remove the sun filter from his periscope because he was waiting so long on the pad and just sort of like looking at stuff through his periscope. So he basically had a pretty bad view from his periscope because he left this really dark filter in it while he was flying. So everything was basically in black and white. Anyway, we all make mistakes, I guess. And his flight lasted 15 minutes and 22 seconds. So just 3 weeks after we put our first guy in a suborbital flight, we decided to go to the moon. That should be easy, right? So 3 weeks after that, Kennedy announced in front of Congress, you may be familiar with the "We choose to go to the moon" speech. That actually was about a little bit over a year later at Rice University in 1962. But publicly we announced in 1961 that we're going to go to the moon. This photo was taken at the Destination Moon Smithsonian exhibit, which is currently traveling around the United States. It will be in Seattle, I believe, starting in April, through the anniversary in July. So presumably the speech was given, people watched it on TVs like this because it was the 60s. But this is just wildly ambitious. Like we first gotten our first guy into like suborbit and suddenly we're like making moon plans. Like that's amazing. Mercury Redstone 4. He is cosplaying as Gus Grissom, who got an inadvertent bath. So before we were going to put a guy into orbit, we had to make sure that our spacecraft was basically like as light and efficient as possible. And Ham and Alan Shepard had a hatch on their capsule that was a mechanical locking hatch, but it was really heavy. We weren't going to be able to use that hatch when we eventually went to orbit, so we decided to try an explosive hatch. What could go wrong? A lot of things, actually. He named his capsule Liberty Del 7. So the flight itself is essentially identical to Shepard. Other than that, actually, yeah, it was basically identical to Shepard. The landing, splashdown was fine. The procedure was that the helicopter would basically come pick up the capsule, put it on the ship, and then they would blow the hatch, and the astronaut would climb out, and everything would be fine. That's not what happened. The hatch effectively blew by itself after splashdown. So Gus basically had to jump out and start swimming because the capsule had started sinking. The helicopter had been trained to come pick up the capsule, so that's exactly what the helicopter did while Gus is like swimming over here. The capsule's sinking, so helicopter 1 is like trying to pull it out of the ocean while the helicopter is also sinking. And they're like, oh crap, we should probably rescue the astronaut as well. So they called in second helicopter to come rescue Gus while they're sort of struggling with the capsule. The second helicopter got to Gus right in time. It turns out that he had forgotten to close the air intake on his spacesuit, so his spacesuit was filling with water and he was like sinking into the ocean. I think they got the rope to him like just in time and were able to pull him out. And when he got on board the helicopter, he immediately like grabbed a life vest and just like clung to it, which probably I'd do as well. The first helicopter ended up having to cut the capsule loose because like they had all three wheels in the water and they were sinking. It was either lose the helicopter and the capsule or just lose the capsule. So they did the math there. It sank to the bottom of the ocean. They were actually able to find it in 1999 and bring it back up. And it was restored. It's at the Kansas Cosmosphere and it looks really cool. Like it's absolutely amazing the restoration job they did on it. Alright, so let's talk about our rocket we used to orbit. This is our Atlas rocket. It kind of had a rough start, had a lot of explosions on the pad. We were not super confident in its capabilities at first. This is an Atlas missile with Kuiper for scale at the San Diego Air and Space Museum Annex. So you can see for scale, like we have our Mercury Redstone rocket. This is how much bigger our launch vehicle was for Atlas. It's big. This is an interesting design. It was called Stage and a Half. It was developed in parallel with the Redstone, and I think we're still kind of trying to figure out how to light one engine after the other. So for this, they actually lit the booster engines and the main engine at the same time when the rocket launched, and then the boosters fell off, which is kind of an interesting design that I don't think we ever really used again. So yeah, that's our Atlas. Oh, and launch vehicle, by the way, is just a really fancy term for like a rocket that we use to send stuff into space. That's all that is. So eventually we got John Glenn into orbit. It's very exciting. He named his capsule Friendship 7. He was the first American to orbit the Earth. This picture was taken at the Chabot Space and Science Center in the Bay Area. This is a replica Mercury capsule that I was able to get Kuiper into. So this is actually kind of a close call. So on the bottom of the capsule you have the heat shield. Underneath the heat shield you have a landing bag that kind of cushions it when we end up doing the splashdown. We received a telemetry error indicating that the landing bag had deployed once he was in orbit, which is a problem because your heat shield's kind of like potentially hanging off if that's the case, and that means that he would burn up on re-entry, which is not good. So I kind of spent a couple of very harrowing hours trying to decide what to do. They eventually sort of MacGyvered a solution that would work whether that was a telemetry error or not, and we were able to sort of get him back safely, but it was really stressful. This is the actual flown Mercury Atlas 7 capsule at the Chicago Museum of Science and History, or Museum of Science and Industry, Chicago, Aurora 7. This was Scott Carpenter's only flight, and based on the research I could find, it seems like he was kind of unfairly blamed for what happened. He overshot his landing area by about 250 miles, which really did not make the people at NASA very happy. There was a interesting point in the capsule design. So you kind of have autopilot and you have manual pilot, and you want to keep those systems totally separate for obvious reasons. But there's not a good indicator when you have one that the other one turns off, and there's no automatic switch off. So you can potentially have both of those systems turned on at the same time, which burns a lot of fuel. That's effectively what happens. So he burned a lot of his fuel really fast. He also had some problems with instruments, and one of the attitude controllers was off by 20 degrees. So if you're trying to navigate and your instruments are off, that's a problem. And they gave him 5 billion tasks to do in science experiments within his 5-minute flight. So he had a lot of stuff to do, and his stuff wasn't working correctly, and it wasn't well designed. But he was kind of blamed as if it was his fault for not paying attention or not being careful enough with his navigation. But I'm not sure that Scott Carpenter actually did anything wrong. He also had a window, which was pretty exciting, so he was like, ooh, a window. But I don't think that was the cause of his problems. But he unfortunately never flew again due to that incident. But here's our actual capsule. Mercury Atlas 8 and 9. There wasn't a whole lot of notable things that I could cram into my presentation. Mercury Atlas 8 was kind of overshadowed by the Cuban Missile Crisis because that started to really heat up around the same exact time. Mercury Atlas 9 was 34 hours versus 9 hours or 5 hours of the previous flight, so it was significantly longer. It was also our first attempt at using slow scan TV in space, and the pictures are not that great, but it was a good first shot. It's pretty interesting. So that was Shira and Kuiper's flights. Deke Slayton didn't end up flying, so we only ended up having 6 Mercury flights. Alright, let's move on to Gemini. We can get someone into orbit, we can get them back from orbit. Now we need to practice rendezvous, which is when you line up a spaceship with another spaceship. We need to practice docking. We need to make sure people can even survive in space for more than a day, because that's we don't know for sure if that has weird, what if you go crazy after 2 days? We don't know. And we also need to practice spacewalks. So this is a Gemini test capsule at the St. Louis Science Center. This is an unflown capsule. We're also going to need a bigger rocket because we're carrying 2 people instead of 1. We're carrying a bunch of supplies. We're carrying spacewalk stuff. So this is a Titan II ICBM with Kuiper for scale at the National Museum for Science, or Nuclear Science and History. It's quite a bit bigger, as you can see. And this is a 2-stage initial. This was used for all of our Gemini missions. So Gemini 1 and 2 were unmanned. Gemini 3 was manned by Gus Grissom, John Young, and a corned beef sandwich. So of course Kuiper got a corned beef sandwich. So NASA was not happy that they brought this corned beef sandwich aboard, partly because if you start eating a corned beef sandwich, there's crumbs everywhere, and that's not ideal. In a 1968 interview, Gus Grissom said, "I thanked John and took a bite, but crumbs of rye bread started floating around the cabin. It became instantly obvious that our life support system wasn't prepared to cope with the high-powered aroma of genuine kosher corned beef. So reluctantly, I stowed it away. After the flight, our superiors at NASA let us know in no uncertain terms that non-man-rated corned beef sandwiches were out for future space flights." This sandwich was given by Wally Schirra to John Young and put it in his pocket, so it wasn't just John Young's fault. The next appearance of corned beef in space would actually be on the space shuttle on a mission commanded by John Young, which is kind of funny. They named the capsule the Unsinkable Molly Brown. NASA didn't think this was very funny, like a reference to the Liberty Bell, which is saying. So Gus said, "Hey, how about we name it the Titanic instead?" NASA didn't like that either, and they didn't let the astronauts name their spacecraft again until Apollo 10. Alright, my camera can only record 29 minutes at a time, so I'm going to turn it off and turn it on real fast. We learned this last time. Alright.
So while you continue,
Sure.
Kuiper's got a perfectly good corned beef sandwich.
He does. He got to eat all of it. I didn't take it away from him.
I was going to say, how long did he have before your shot was over?
He had it for a couple minutes. He's really good. I've been training him since he was 10 weeks old, so he knows, if there's food there and I don't tell him he can eat it, he can't eat it. Do you have a question?
What kind of dog is Kuiper?
He's a whippet. So you have greyhounds, they're about 80 or 90 pounds, they're about this tall. You have Italian greyhounds that are about this tall, and whippets are the regular sized candy bar in between. So they're about 30 to 40 pounds. They were actually bred down from greyhounds a few hundred years ago, but they were bred with a little terrier in them, so a little bit sort of more game and more energized. So that's a great question. Let's see. Gemini 4 was the first mission that was commanded from NASA Johnson. This is an actual Johnson console at the Stafford Air and Space Museum that he's standing with. So from here on out, the missions are going to be from Houston rather than Cape Canaveral. This is our first attempt at a rendezvous, which didn't actually go so well, but it was a good first try. This is also our first spacewalk. So Ed White was our first astronaut to walk into space. He was really excited about this. He thought this was the coolest thing ever. And every time they were like, "Ed, we gotta go," he was like, "5 more minutes, Mom! I gotta take more pictures." So eventually they managed to convince him to come back into the spacecraft because they only had so much oxygen, which was good. Because James McDivitt had strict orders to cut him loose if he wouldn't come back in. So James did not have to be traumatized for life because of this. So we learned there's a thing called space euphoria. Yes?
Did Ed know about that?
I'm not sure. I don't think he cared at the time. This is the actual recovery helicopter from Gemini 4 at the USS Hornet Museum. The notable thing about this helicopter, it was repainted as the Apollo 13 recovery helicopter and used in an actual movie. So this is a museum on an aircraft carrier. It is the aircraft carrier that recovered Apollo 11. I highly recommend going and visiting it. It's in Alameda, California, and they're really cool.
What were you saying about space euphoria?
Oh, space euphoria. So that's the term that we give the effect when someone is like, "Oh, space!" And you go outside and spacewalk for the first time. And that's all you can really think about. You're just really excited about space and don't really care about breathing or coming home or any of those other pesky details.
This is why David Boyle.
Gemini 5. I didn't really have a good picture for this one. This is my dog eating a bagel. Although, funny story, there was America's first rocket scientist was named Mary Sherman, and she invented the fuel that would take up Explorer 1, which was our first satellite. She recommended that they name it the fuel bagel, so they could say the satellite was launched with bagel and lox. So the Army was like, no. So they named it Hydine, which is way lamer. But anyway, Gemini 5, the motto is 8 days or bust. This is the first time they used fuel cells instead of batteries, so they're able to significantly increase the mission length. But unfortunately, some stuff went wrong. They weren't able to do all the experiments they had planned, so they're actually pretty bored for most of the mission. Pete Conrad later described it as 8 days in a garbage can, and expressed that he had brought a book with him. He didn't bring a book, so he was pretty bored. But this was 7 days, 23 hours. It wasn't really almost 8 days. Gemini 6 and Gemini 7. The original plan for Gemini 6 was to have it rendezvous with an unmanned vehicle, And unfortunately, that unmanned vehicle exploded on the launch pad, so that plane was kind of out. So instead, they decided to have Gemini 7 launch as planned, and then they had Gemini 6 rendezvous with it. This is the flown Gemini 6 capsule at the Stafford Air and Space Museum. We almost got to meet some Stafford when we were there. He was there the same day, but our schedules didn't quite line up, but it was pretty exciting knowing he and I were like in the same like Oklahoma town at the same time. This Air and Space Museum is actually really cool. It's one of my favorites. And it's dog friendly, so I asked for permission and they thought I could have brought him anyway, which was pretty cool. So they said, let's do it live. Let's rendezvous with the other Gemini capsule. They were able to do that. And that's why you'll see Gemini 6 described as Gemini 6A, which means that it's a different mission than they had originally planned. They were able to rendezvous with them. But, alright. So you have, in space, in three-dimensional space, you have three different axes you can move on. You have pitch, which is up and down. You have roll, which is kind of self-explanatory. Yaw is turning left and right. When you're moving in a bunch of those directions, like without control, it's not very comfortable. Gemini 8, this is the first docking missions. They were docking with an unmanned craft. As soon as they docked with the craft, they started rolling and yawing, and it was not very pleasant. So they figured there was probably a problem with the unmanned craft, so let's undock real fast, we'll be fine. As soon as they undocked, they started spinning faster, because that's how physics work. They dumped a bunch of mass, which was not good. Neil Armstrong was really quick thinking. He managed to get their spacecraft under control. It turned out the problem was with the Gemini capsule. They had a thruster that had stuck open because of a circuit failure. And they were spinning pretty fast, like 1 second per revolution. So it's good that he was able to get them under control. Unfortunately, to do that, they had to use the reentry, like some of the fuel from the reentry system. Protocol said, hey, if you do that, you have to come back. So this mission only lasted about 10 hours, but they were able to get back safely. This is kind of our first space emergency that we were able to get under control. So they came home, it was fine. Lots of spinning. Gemini 9 is actually a pretty sad story. So we have our original crew, which is Elliot C. and Charles Bassett. We have our flown crew, which is Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan. They were flying together in two different jets to the St. Louis airport to check out their new spacecraft. It was a pretty low visibility day. It was pretty cloudy. Unfortunately, our original crew crashed at the airport, where the backup crew landed fine. So this is a really sad tragedy, but it's also the mission that put Aldrin on the moon because they had to reshuffle the astronaut schedule. So without this, Aldrin probably wouldn't have been on Apollo 11, which is interesting. Gemini 10 and 11. This is not my dog. This is a cat. His name is Purry Gagarin. I've been stalking this cat on Instagram for a year because he kept posting pictures of the cat in museums, but I thought they were photoshopped because they were just so perfect. It was as if they had taken the cat, put him on a table, and just sort of put it over a picture in a museum until they posted a video of the cat walking down a gantry at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, and I was like, wait a minute. So I googled the cat's name and found out that this cat had in fact been visiting museums. So I sent a message to the cat account and I was like, how did you get permission to do this? And they said, just ask. And that's the sort of how I've taken my dog to Air and Space Museums now. So I'm friends. The cat lives in Toronto. I'm hoping we can meet up and do a photo shoot with him at some point. But without seeing this cat, I don't think I would have been brave enough to ask any museum. But you figure if they're going to let a cat in, they're probably going to let a really well-trained dog in. And that turned out to be the case. So Gemini 10 and 11 were sort of more rendezvous, more docking, more practicing space maneuvers. Gemini 12. This is the flown Gemini 12 capsule at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, and they were amazing. You can tell my dog liked it because he's all excited and he's posing. This is Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin. This was the first use of underwater training to prepare for spacewalks, which it turned out helped a lot because before our training for spacewalks had been in gravity, and it didn't really prepare them very well, and they found spacewalking really exhausting and stressful. It turned out that underwater training was much closer to the real thing. Alright, everything was going mostly great until it wasn't. Apollo 1. These are the actual backup suits for the Apollo 1 astronauts who passed away in the Apollo 1 fire. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee effectively sacrificed themselves for the space program. I guess sort of the not really good news, but it could have been worse news. It turned out there were a bunch of flaws in the capsule design. So this was just a manned test. It wasn't actually launched. They were just sort of doing a test on the launch pad. But there were so many design flaws in the capsule that they weren't able to get these guys out in time when a fire started. There were some other things that contributed to the accidents. The fire started really close to the depressurization valve, so if they'd been able to get to that valve and get the capsule, things might have turned out differently. At this time, they were using a fully oxygen atmosphere within the capsule, which made it easier to prepare people for spacewalks, and also made it easier because you only had to carry one tank of stuff. You didn't have to carry nitrogen and stuff along with you as well. But because of the way they were doing things, it was positive pressure, so you had higher pressure on the inside than on the outside, and the hatch was designed to open inside, so if you have pressure pushing on that, it makes it hard to open. Also, because of the way Grissom's hatch had blown, they had designed this new mechanical locking hatch that was super secure. Unfortunately, too secure for this. They also had Velcro all over the inside of the capsule. It turns out the Velcro was super duper flammable, which is not ideal. And the ground crew wasn't really prepared to deal with a fire. They were prepared to deal with chemical spills or fumes, but they weren't well prepared to deal with a fire. So that changed. After this accident, they did have another manned mission for 22 months. So they just shut down everything. They're like, we have to completely redo this. And they made a ton of design changes. Yes, is your question? Sorry? I don't know if we know what sparked it initially. I'm not sure if they figured that out or not. So Apollo 2 and Apollo 3 don't exist. I think they took a couple of other test missions with the first design of the command module and kind of retroactively sort of named that. We have Apollo 4, 5, and 6. These are all unmanned test launches. 5 and 6 were the lunar module. This is a replica lunar module with Kuiper for scale at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. Very exciting. Alright, 22 months later, we have Apollo 7, which is our first manned mission after the Apollo 1 fire. Wally Schirra, Don Eisel, and Walter Cunningham. This is Kuiper walking down a gantry at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. This is Swing Arm 8. I think it was only used for testing. This was to test the new command module design. They made hundreds of design changes after the fire. Wally Schirra had a really bad cold, and he was really, really grumpy for this entire mission. I think he gave his cold to the other two astronauts, and they were grumpy. With the result that the other two astronauts never flew again because they were all just so grumpy and unhappy with each other. Yeah. This is also the first live TV broadcast from space. They had kind of the Wally show. They had a few different episodes of it, which is pretty cute. This is also the first time astronauts had both hot and cold water for food prep, which was kind of a big deal. Before they only had cold water, and that's no fun. At no time did they have freezer ice cream. That is a lie. There is no such thing as astronaut ice cream. Astronaut ice cream is also known as real ice cream. As of the 70s, astronauts had real freezers on board their spacecraft, and they ate normal ice cream like normal people. So, I guess good job marketing, but it's not an actual thing that people use. I know, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. Apollo 8, this is our first visit to the moon. Apollo 11 wasn't our first visit to the moon. Apollo 8, we actually did an orbit. It was very exciting. This is a flown spacecraft at the Museum of Science and Industry, Chicago. They visited the moon on Christmas Eve 50 years ago, this Christmas Eve. So that was on my Christmas card this year. This is the first picture of the Earth taken by a human being. It was taken by Bill Anders. They were really excited and really excited about getting the right camera settings, and Lowell was especially excited and was trying to tell Anders what to do. If you look at the transcript, Anders is calm down, Lowell. It's pretty great. They did a live Christmas Eve broadcast from lunar orbit. It was watched by about 25% of the people alive on Earth at the time, which is amazing. You may have heard that they read part of Genesis as part of that broadcast. That's true, but they actually spent most of their half hour just sort of describing what they saw on the moon. So I'll read some of that to you. Borman said, the moon is a different thing to each one of us. I think that each one carries his own impression of what he's seen today. I know my own impression is that it's a vast, lonely, forbidding type existence. Great expanse of nothing that looks rather like clouds and clouds of pumice stone. And it certainly would not appear to be a very inviting place to live or work. Lowell said, well, Frank, my thoughts were very similar. The vast loneliness up here of the moon is awe-inspiring, and makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. The Earth from here is a grand oasis in the big vastness of space. Anders, I think the thing that impressed me most was the lunar sunrises and sunsets. These in particular bring out the stark nature of the terrain, and the long shadows really bring out the relief that is here and hard to see in the very bright surface that we're going over right now. And then they spent a bunch of time just sort of describing what they saw and various craters and features on the moon, like here's a little science experiment. And at the very end, they read the first 10 verses of Genesis and ended with, "From the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, and Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on this good earth." So, anyway, aw. Apollo 9. This is a flown Apollo 9 capsule at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. The purpose of this was to test our command and service module, make sure that we can deploy our lunar module and dock it and sort of get ready. This was all done in Earth orbit. So since Gemini 3, this is the first time the astronauts were allowed to use code names for their spacecraft again. They had to because when you have some people in the lunar module and some people in the command module, you have to be able to distinguish between the two. So they nicknamed the command module Gumdrop. It came in this blue wrapping when it was delivered. It looked kind of like a gumdrop. And then the lunar module looks kind of spidery when it's deploying, so they called it Spider. Apollo 10. This is our full dress rehearsal. We did everything we did in Apollo 11 without the actual landing. So we came within about 47,000 feet of the lunar surface, which must have been like, for the astronauts. This is a full-scale model of the Saturn V rocket with Kuiper for scale. And Kuiper and me for scale. We are right here.
Oh, good Lord.
I know, oh good Lord, that's what I said in person. It's huge. It's amazing. And they have an actual rocket inside the center. It was raining, so I was like, alright, we're going to take a picture really fast, and you're just going to coat Kuiper, and then we'll get dry. And he's like, fine. They codenamed the command module Charlie Brown, the lunar module Snoopy. Charles Schultz also thought this was really cool, and he drew some art for NASA. Like, he thought this was amazing.
Can I add one tiny thing?
Sure.
This is a true fact.
Yeah.
They underfueled the lander specifically so he wouldn't try.
And you knew that? Yeah. Have you guys heard that? They underfueled the lander specifically so the astronauts wouldn't try. Which actually, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, who wouldn't try at that point? Like, you don't care about your career, you're going to the freaking moon. Anyway, that's probably a good idea, just in case. It's tempting. This is the actual flown Apollo 11 capsule at the St. Louis Air and Space Museum. It will be in Seattle in April. Go see it. Otherwise, after it's exhibited in Seattle, it'll be going back to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., so you can go see it there, along with Freedom 7 and a bunch of other amazing space artifacts. So, yes, is my summary here. This is actually the first museum we visited, and he was like, why would I look at you? This is silly. But I made him, I brought this like American flag collar for him. I also made him a bandana with the blueprints of the Columbia module, which I have some pictures of as well. In summary, space is cool. There's a lot of amazing details about history that I didn't have a chance to tell you about, like the 500 tree seeds that were flown on Apollo 14 and are planted around the country. There's moon trees everywhere. It's really fun. There's just like so many little details about the space program that are fun to look up. There's thousands of technical documents online if you like sifting through those. Like anyone that thinks we didn't actually go to the moon, like you can just like look up all of the little details we figured out to get there. It's just absolutely amazing. Getting the moon is very complicated. You can follow me on Instagram for more. His name is Space With It. I think he hit 70,000 followers today, which is pretty cool. If you guys have any questions, I think we have a few more minutes. We do. We have like 10 minutes. So, yes.
No.
Oh, yes.
Have you made it to the new Apollo 1 memorial at Kennedy yet?
I have not. My understanding is that it's very, very, very challenging to get permission to take a dog influencer to Kennedy. So I'm going to wait until he's a little bit more famous before I even pose that question.
So everybody friend him.
Yes, everyone follow Kuiper. So maybe in the future I may ask. They also have Apollo 14, which is my personal favorite mission, so I'm really hoping we can visit that at some point. Other questions? Yeah.
Why is 14 your favorite?
Because of the moon trees. Like, you can visit these trees that were flown around the moon. Like, they planted them as part of the bicentennial. I think there's about 50 trees still living and planted in the United States. There's a list of them online. I think we visited about 15 of them or so. Those trees are kind of amazing. Those seeds, so they took these seeds in this canister, they saved the command module, but during decontamination, the seed canister was exposed to vacuum and actually exploded. So they weren't sure if any of those seeds would make it. They decided to plant them and give them a chance, and almost all of them germinated. So, yes, back there.
If you're interested in learning more about the Earthrise picture, and for the 50th anniversary of that, the Scientific Visualization Studio at NASA Goddard recreated it in CG.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah,
they were able to figure out like what orientation the capsule was in.
I work at Goddard. My friend.
Oh, cool.
My friend Ernie was the one who did that.
Oh, I want want to talk to you afterwards. That's amazing. Yeah.
Talk about it later.
Yeah, so they...
Strongly recommend anybody who bothers to come to this, go to the SBS and look up the Scientific Visualization Studio and look up the Apollo.
Yeah, so they were able to basically take a bunch of pictures that they took on Apollo 8 and basically recreate like what angle and like the orientation of the spacecraft and figure out exactly which window they took it through and everything, which is just really cool.
Ernie has more patience than I will ever have in my life.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Sure.
Anyone else? Questions? Yes.
What got you interested in space?
I was always interested in space as a little kid and kind of forgot about it. Then we decided we wanted to name him kind of a space name. I was looking for places to take pictures of him and stumbled across a moon tree, and I was like, what's a moon tree? And then I fell down a rabbit hole, and here I am talking in front of you. Please. Other questions? Yes.
Have you read Amy Shertitle's book on the history of space for NASA?
Which book is this?
It's Breaking the Chains of Gravity by Amy Shertitle.
Ooh, I'll put it on the list. I have not.
It's really good.
Yeah, I read Failures on Option by Gene Kranz. I've been reading a couple other books. Fun fact, Failures on Option is not a thing that Gene Kranz ever actually said outside of the Apollo movie, although he did title his book that, so he must have liked it. But it wasn't something they ever actually said. They made it up for the movie. So if you see those things at NASA, like, they're using it for marketing, but it's not actually quote. Yes?
One last thing. Did you see the new Apollo 11 documentary?
I want to see it. Like, it came out last week, and I've been like stalking it for the last 3 months. Like, I saw a trailer of it in November, and I absolutely cannot wait to see it.
It's worth every effort to see it.
Yeah.
A big IMAX.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So they took a bunch of like really, really, really high quality film, and they made this documentary called Apollo 11. And it looks very modern and very professional because it was shot with this film that was so high quality at the time. I think it's out in theaters as of last weekend, so go see Apollo 11. Yes.
I might have missed it, but is this presentation have anything to do with your day job?
No, absolutely nothing to do with my day job. Maybe someday this will be my day job, which would be pretty exciting. But right now I've made $0 off of Instagram, so that number needs to increase to more than $0. Any more questions?
Actually, a real thing. When you were talking about the levers and the lights, I'm like, oh my god, because that happens in a Curious George story. They put him up in a space capsule and like they flash a light and he has to pull a lever and they're like,
I didn't know that.
Is he gonna do it? Is he gonna do it? And he does it and becomes and I'm like,
all right, I need to go buy this Curious George book.
yeah, like, this is real thing.
That's amazing. And I didn't know that there was a Curious George book about ham. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like I knew that monkeys went to space, so I thought it was just that, and like the rest was just H.A. Rey like being imaginative, but apparently not. Apparently,
H.A. Rey did their research apparently. So, yeah. Other questions?
This is going to sound very, very silly.
Sure. This is pretty silly taking my dog and photographing him in the museum.
Well, yeah,
so.
let's come along with that, though. I love it so much. It's so fun.
Thank you.
We're going to not with it, but what is the most challenging thing about working with Kuiper? I read the text.
I want to keep him happy. I don't want to like force him to do things that he wants to do. Every once in a while, it's kind of like, no, we're doing this photo shoot. This is our one shot. I'm not like mean about it or anything, but I mean, we put so much work into him from day one. Like we've been obedience training him since he was 10 weeks old. So we just try to make it a really good experience for him. So
Because I'm sure with it's more than many dogs have the squirrel built in.
we've actually been working on like sort of focus training since he was 10 weeks old because my goal is to do competitive obedience, which is a sport kind of like dressage but with dogs. They need to be able to focus 100% on you for about 10 minutes. So you need to build that up from nothing. So we worked really hard at getting him to like focus on me and like distracting situations. Like I can tell him to watch me and like throw a kibble on the ground and he'll keep watching me. So you have to like work. You have to spend a lot of time on that. I effectively like took all the time I was spending video gaming and put it into like dog training and like Instagram stuff, and it's kind of paid off. So
yeah.
More questions? Yes.
How old is Kuiper now?
Kuiper will be 3 in July. So he's still pretty young. Whippets live for about 14, 15 years. They're a super duper healthy breed. So we have another dog who's an older rescue dog who's kind of severely special needs. So I really wanted to get a second, like very healthy dog so we can continue to take good care of our special needs dog. So, more questions? Probably have time for a couple more. Yes.
Did you see that there's a rocket launch on Friday?
I saw that someone posted about that on Twitter.
That was me.
Oh, thank you for posting that on Twitter. I'd love to find out more information about that.
I don't know if we're going to be able to see it, but everybody in this room will probably enjoy it.
Yeah, I got to see a Falcon 9 launch as part of like my trip on the way back. I visited the Planetary Society with Kuiper, and they're like, "Want to come watch a rocket launch?" And I was like, "What kind of question is that?" So I got some cool pictures of that I don't have here today, but I'll be posting at some point. So.
The Falcon 9 outside of SpaceX's factory in Hawthorne is very accessible.
Oh, cool.
You can just walk on the sidewalk.
Wow. I'll check it out. All right. One more question. I can wait. I can wait for 4 minutes. All right. It's fine if there's no more questions. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. I have little business cards for Kuiper if you want a card. So, thank you so much.